There's a clock on a Manhattan sidewalk that never stops. It hangs on the side of a building on 6th Avenue. You've probably seen it, maybe even photographed it. The red numbers change so fast your eyes can barely follow. Right now, it reads over $37 trillion. That's the national debt of the United States. Live, in real time. Most people glance at it and feel vaguely uncomfortable. The way you feel when you check your bank statement after a rough month. Then they keep walking. But here's the thing nobody talks about. The man who put that clock there, he was one of the largest private landlords in Manhattan. His family owned billions of dollars worth of real estate on the same island where that clock hangs. And while that clock screamed about government waste, his family was quietly collecting tax subsidies, government contracts, and zoning favors from the very state the clock was shaming. That's not a conspiracy. That's just how power actually works. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Let me take you back to 1902. A man steps off a ship at the port of New York. His name is Joseph Durst. He comes from a small village called Gorlice, a place in what is today southern Poland, but back then was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. A place most Americans have never heard of, and never will. He has $3 in his pocket, not 300, not 3,000, $3. He doesn't speak English, he knows how to sew. And somewhere inside him, in that quiet, stubborn way that immigrants carry their reasons for leaving, he has made a decision. He is not going back. Now I want you to sit with that image for a second. Because we live in a world that loves to talk about billionaires like they came from nowhere. Like the money just appeared. Like success is this clean, straight line from ambition to arrival. But Joseph Durst didn't arrive in America with a strategy or a vision board or a network. He arrived with a trade, a survival instinct, and $3. He spent his first years in New York doing what immigrants do, working, saving, watching. He became a tailor, then a partner in a small dress manufacturing company in the garment district, the stretch of Midtown between 5th and 8th Avenue, around 34th Street, the same neighborhood where people went to make things with their hands. And then, in 1915, he did something that would echo for 100 years. He bought a building. It wasn't glamorous. 12 floors, commercial space, 1 West 34th Street, a few blocks from where he worked every day. He knew the block. He knew who rented there. He understood the value of that street the way you understand something only when you've walked it every morning for years. That building was the beginning of what would become, over 4 generations, the most powerful private real estate empire in Manhattan. But here's the part that never makes it into the Forbes profiles. Joseph Durst didn't buy that building because he saw the future of Midtown. He bought it because it was close, it was real, and he could afford it. The genius wasn't vision. The genius was something simpler and much harder to teach. He bought it, and then he didn't sell it. That's it. That's the whole philosophy. While other investors speculated, flipped, borrowed against assets to buy more assets, and eventually over-leveraged themselves into collapse, the Durst family held. When the Great Depression hit in 1929, Joseph didn't sell. When World War II reshaped the economy, the family held. When New York City nearly went bankrupt in the 1970s, when Times Square looked more like a crime scene than a commercial district, when every major real estate developer was quietly liquidating their Manhattan holdings, the family held. There's a phrase that shows up in almost every interview with a member of this family, across every decade. We don't sell. 3 words. But understand what those 3 words actually mean over a century of compounding appreciation on some of the most scarce land on the planet. Manhattan is an island, 59 square kilometers. That's it. You cannot build more Manhattan. You cannot import it. You cannot manufacture it. Every square foot that exists today is every square foot that will ever exist. And when a family plants its flag on a piece of that island in 1915 and refuses to move that flag for 100 years, the math works in a way that has almost nothing to do with intelligence and almost everything to do with patience. Joseph Durst died in 1973 at the age of 91. By then, the family had expanded into commercial towers, residential buildings, land parcels across Midtown, each one acquired the same way, quietly, without fanfare, without outside investors, without ever losing control. His son Seymour inherited the company in 1974, and Seymour would take everything his father built and add a layer to it that nobody expected. He would take a real estate empire and turn it into a public statement. He would take a building and turn it into a billboard, not to advertise a company, to shame the government. February 1989. Seymour Durst stands in front of his building at 1133 Avenue of the Americas and watches a crew install something unusual on the facade. A large electronic display, red digits, numbers changing faster than you can read them. He spent $100,000 of his own money on this, not to advertise the family business, not to honor his father, not to attract tenants or generate press. He did it to shame the federal government of the United States. The display showed, in real time, the growing national debt of America. Every dollar, every cent, every second, running, publicly, on the side of a building that his family owned in the heart of Midtown Manhattan. He called it the National Debt Clock. And here's what I want you to think about. Seymour Durst was not a fringe figure. He was not a political outsider. He was not some frustrated taxpayer with a grudge and a billboard. He was one of the most connected real estate men in New York City. He had served as president of the Real Estate Board of New York. He moved in the same rooms as mayors, governors, senators. He had lunch with the kind of people who make decisions that move billions of dollars. And he put a clock on his building to tell America that its government was fiscally irresponsible. Now, let's hold that image. Because at the exact same time that clock was running, at the exact same time those red numbers were climbing, Seymour Durst and his son Douglas were negotiating with the city and state of New York for millions of dollars in tax breaks and public incentives to build their next project. $10.7 million in tax abatements, $4 million per year in additional exemptions, from the same government the clock was shaming. I want to be careful here, because what I'm describing is not a crime. It's not even unusual. It is, in fact, exactly what every sophisticated real estate family in that city was doing at the same time. You hire the lawyers, you work the system, you take what the system offers, and then you go home and complain about the system over dinner. The difference with the Durst family is that they put the complaint on the building. Most powerful people keep that contradiction private. Seymour made it public. And that, strangely enough, is what makes this story worth telling. The clock was turned off in the year 2000, when the national debt briefly started declining during the Clinton surplus years. Seymour himself had died in 1995. He never saw it turned off. His son Douglas turned it back on in 2002, when the debt started climbing again after September 11th. In 2008, when the debt crossed $10 trillion, the clock ran out of digits. The display didn't have enough space to show the number. Think about that for a moment. The machine built to count the debt wasn't built large enough to contain it. A new version was eventually installed near the Bank of America Tower, Another Durst building, 1 Bryant Park, where it still stands today. $37 trillion and rising. Now here's the detail that almost never gets mentioned. The Bank of America Tower, the building the clock now stands next to, was built by the Durst organization with financing that was supported in part by public green energy bonds issued by the state of New York. It was the first LEED Platinum office skyscraper in the United States, a genuine architectural achievement, and also a project that would not have been financially viable in that form without public support. The clock shames the debt. The debt, in part, funded the building the clock stands next to. I've sat with this for a long time, and I don't think Seymour Durst was a villain. I think he was something more honest than that. A man who genuinely believed two things at the same time: that government spends too much, and that when government offers you money, you take it. Most people in rooms of power believe exactly that. They just don't put a clock on their building about it. There is something almost admirable in the audacity of it. He didn't hide the contradiction. He mounted it on the wall and invited the whole city to look at it. Whether that was self-awareness or simply arrogance dressed as principle, I'll let you decide. What I can tell you is this: the clock is still running, the family is still collecting, and the story is just getting started. Because Seymour had a son, and that son was about to make a decision that would take everything his grandfather built, a tailor's patience, a family's refusal to sell, and turn it into something the old man from Gorlice could never have imagined. He was going to put his name on the most symbolic building in America, not by building it, by buying into it. After the worst day in American history, there's a rule that most old families follow without ever writing it down. The oldest son inherits. It doesn't matter if he's ready. It doesn't matter if there's a younger brother who has spent 20 years inside the business and understands it better than anyone alive. The oldest son inherits. That's the rule. That's how dynasties protect themselves from the chaos of choice. Seymour Durst broke that rule in 1992. He had 2 sons. Robert was the eldest, Douglas was second. And when Seymour decided he could no longer run the company, he looked at both of them and handed the keys to Douglas. What followed in Robert's personal life became one of the most covered stories in American media. But that's a different story for a different day. What matters here, what matters for the empire, is a single number. In 2006, Robert sued the family. He claimed his share of a trust that Seymour had created back in 1962 had been systematically undervalued for decades. The family settled. He walked away with $65 million and no remaining stake in the organization. $65 million. To exit an empire now worth over $8 billion. Sit with that trade for a moment. Not to judge Robert, but to understand what Douglas inherited and what he understood about what he was holding that his brother apparently did not. Because when Douglas took over in 1992, the easy move was obvious. Consolidate, manage what exists, collect the rent. Let the buildings do what buildings do when a family has spent 77 years refusing to sell them. Douglas didn't make the easy move. He looked at Times Square. Now I need you to understand what Times Square was in 1992, not what it is today. The billboards, the crowds, the tourist photographs, the New Year's Eve countdown. What it was then. It was dirty, it was dangerous. It was the kind of block that serious real estate money avoided the way you avoid a conversation you know is going to cost you something. Investors who knew New York knew where you built. You built in Midtown East, in the financial district, in the established corridors where corporate tenants felt safe sending their employees every morning. You did not bet on Times Square. Douglas Durst bet on Times Square. And here is a moment I want you to feel. Not just understand, but actually feel. Douglas was not a young man making his first bold move. He was a man in his late 40s who had already spent 24 years inside this business, who had watched his father hold through recessions and fiscal crises and urban decay, who had one leg. He lost part of the right one in a heating accident in 1972, 20 years before he took over the company, who wore a prosthetic every day to work, who walked through construction sites on that prosthetic, in that city, making that bet, on that block that nobody else wanted. That's not a detail the Forbes profiles linger on, but it matters, because the man who rebuilt Times Square was not some untouchable golden figure, operating from a position of comfort and certainty. He was someone who had already learned, in a very physical and permanent way, that things break, that life does not move in a straight line, that you can lose something real and still show up the next morning and keep going. His father had taught him not to sell. His own body had taught him something harder, that staying is a choice you make every single day. In the late 1990s, the family began construction on what would become 4 Times Square, later renamed 151 West 42nd Street. 48 floors, 1.6 million square feet. The first green skyscraper in America. Solar panels, high-efficiency air systems, environmental standards that didn't exist yet as industry benchmarks, because the Durst organization was helping to write them. When the building opened in 1999, it changed the block. Not because it was the tallest, not because it was the most expensive, because it was the first one there. And in real estate, as in most things, the first one there sets the price for everyone who comes after. The family received $10.7 million in tax abatements from the city to build it. $4 million per year in additional exemptions, public money, government incentives. The clock was still on the building next door. The numbers were still climbing. And then, without pausing, without celebrating, without doing what most people do after a defining win, which is rest, Douglas moved to the next thing. The Bank of America Tower at 1 Bryant Park, 55 floors, 2.1 million square feet. The first LEED Platinum office skyscraper in the United States. Rents between $90 and $120 per square foot, when the Midtown average was between $70 and $85. The premium for being green. Tens of millions of additional dollars per year. And then the call came that nobody expected. September 11th, 2001, had left a hole in Lower Manhattan that the country spent 9 years trying to figure out how to fill. The Port Authority owned the site. They knew how to build. They did not know how to lease, how to market, how to convince major corporations to put their employees in a building that carried the weight of the worst day in American memory. In 2010, Douglas Durst walked into that conversation with a proposal. The Durst organization would invest a minimum of $100 million, take over leasing, marketing, and commercial operations, put in another $100 million if needed. In exchange, a stake in the building estimated at around 10%, a base fee of $15 million, a sliding bonus on every dollar saved during construction. The federal government said yes. The son of the man who installed the national debt clock to shame the government became the private co-owner of the most symbolically charged government building in the Western world. One World Trade Center, 1,776 feet tall, the height of a declaration, the address of a family that arrived with $3 and never stopped showing up. I want to ask you something. When your rent goes up, and it does, it always does, who do you blame? Most people blame the landlord. Some blame the market. Some blame inflation, the economy, the general feeling that everything costs more than it used to, and nothing about that is ever going to change. What almost nobody does is walk back far enough to find the room where the decision actually started. Because there is a room. There has always been a room. Think of it this way. Imagine a card game. Not a casual game between friends, a serious game. The kind where real money changes hands and the stakes compound over decades. Now imagine that some of the players at the table, not all of them, just a few, also wrote the rule book. And they wrote it a long time ago, before most of the other players were born. And every few years, when the rules need updating, those same players are the ones called into the room to update them. Would you expect the rules to favor the people who wrote them? Of course you would. That's not cynicism. That's just how institutions work when the people most affected by the rules are also the people most involved in writing them. The institution in this story is called the Real Estate Board of New York, the REBNY, founded in 1896, 129 years old. And in those 129 years, it has done something that almost no other private institution in American history has managed to do consistently, quietly, and without interruption. It has kept its players at the table. Seymour Durst served as its president. Douglas Durst served as its president. Bill Rudin, fourth generation of the Rudin family, served as its president. Larry Silverstein sits on its board. The Fisher family, the Lefrak family. Every name in this story has a seat at that table. And here is what that table actually does. New York City runs on a zoning code, a document that determines what can be built, where, how tall, how dense, for what purpose. That document shapes the value of every piece of land in the 5 boroughs. Change the code, allow taller buildings in a neighborhood, permit new commercial uses on a block that was previously residential, and the value of the land in that area changes. Not gradually, not over years, overnight. The gap between the value of a piece of land before a rezoning and after a rezoning is not a market return. It is a transfer. Wealth moves from the public, which created the value through policy decisions, to the private actors who understood the policy before it was announced and positioned themselves accordingly. This is not illegal. I need you to hear that clearly. None of this is illegal. It is, in fact, the system functioning exactly as designed.
The question is simply, designed by whom and for whom? Now here's the part that makes this more than just a real estate story. In 2024, the real estate sector generated $37 billion in tax revenue for New York City. That is 49% of the city's entire local tax base. Nearly 1 out of every $2 the city collects comes from real estate, which means that the families sitting at that table, the families at the REBNY, the families who have been in that room since 1896, are not just landlords. They are, in a very real and functional sense, the financial infrastructure of the city itself. And the city cannot afford to make them angry. That's the card the rulebook writers have always held. Not power through force, not power through corruption, power through indispensability, power through becoming so structurally embedded in the functioning of a city that the city cannot easily rewrite the rules without the consent of the people the rules were written to protect. There's a moment in this history I keep coming back to. 1975. New York City is on the edge of bankruptcy. The fiscal crisis is real. Municipal services are collapsing. The words "Ford to City, drop dead" are about to become one of the most famous newspaper headlines in American history. Into that crisis steps Louis Rudin, son of the founder of Rudin Management, one of the most powerful real estate families in the city. He organizes a consortium of major property owners to prepay $600 million in property taxes in advance to stabilize the city's finances. It was reported as civic generosity, a sacrifice, wealthy men stepping up to save the city they loved. And maybe it was. But sit with the math for a moment. Property owners who let New York City go bankrupt would have seen the value of their Manhattan holdings collapse. The city's credit rating, its ability to fund infrastructure, its attractiveness to corporate tenants, all of it tied directly to fiscal stability. The men who saved New York were the men with the most to lose if New York wasn't saved. The rulebook writers saved the game. Because without the game, the rulebook means nothing. And when the city recovered, when Midtown came back, when the corporate tenants returned, when the rents climbed back toward the sky, the same families collected, the same names, the same room, the same table. That's not a conspiracy. Conspiracies need secrets. This doesn't need secrets. It just needs continuity, institutional memory, the kind of patience that outlasts every crisis, every administration, every generation of people who notice the pattern and then quietly stop talking about it. The Durst family has that patience. They've had it since 1902. Since a man with $3 looked at an island he didn't yet understand and made a decision that his great-grandchildren are still living inside of. The table is still set, the game is still running, and the clock on the wall is still counting something that the rule book was never designed to fix. I want to tell you about a church, not because this story is about religion, but because there is a piece of land in Lower Manhattan that has been owned by the same institution since 1704. And what happened to that land over 320 years is the most honest illustration I know of how wealth actually compounds when it's built on ground.
In 1704, Queen Anne of England granted the Trinity Church, an Anglican parish at the southern tip of Manhattan, 215 acres of land on the island. The grant stretched from what is today Fulton Street all the way up to Christopher Street. It covered what we now call Tribeca, Hudson Square, and parts of the West Village. Queen Anne has been dead for 311 years. Trinity Church still owns approximately 8% of that original grant. 8% of 215 acres in Lower Manhattan in 2025, generating rent every month from some of the most valuable commercial real estate on the planet. Funding, among other things, the Trinity School, one of the most expensive private schools in New York City, with annual tuition approaching $60,000 per year. A dead queen's gift is still paying tuition in 2025. I want you to sit with that, not as a curiosity, as a mechanism, because what Trinity Church demonstrates, in its purest, most undeniable form, is the fundamental logic of land ownership. You don't have to be smart. You don't have to be innovative. You don't have to build anything, or create anything, or add any value to the world. You just have to own the ground and refuse to give it up, and let time do the rest. The Durst family understood this in 1915. The Rudin family understood this in 1905. Every family in this story understood it, and they all arrived at the same conclusion from different directions. In a city that cannot expand geographically, the person who owns the ground is not participating in the economy. They are taxing it. That word, taxing, is not rhetorical. Think about what rent actually is. When you pay rent, you are not paying for a service. You are not paying someone back for a value they created. The landlord did not create the location. The location existed before the landlord was born. The value of that location, its proximity to jobs, to transit, to schools, to other people, was created by the collective activity of millions of human beings over decades and centuries. The landlord simply owns the legal right to charge you for access to that collective creation. In 2024, the real estate sector generated $37 billion in tax revenue for New York City. That represents 49% of the city's entire local tax base. Nearly 1 out of every $2 the city collects comes from real estate, which means that the families who own the real estate are not just landlords. They are, in a functional sense, the city's primary tax collectors. The government taxes its citizens. The landowners tax the government's tax base. And the institution that coordinates the landowners, the REBNY, makes sure the rules stay favorable to the people inside the room. This is not unique to New York. I want you to think about your city, your neighborhood, the building you live in or work in, or pass every morning on your way somewhere else. Think about who owned that land before the building was there. Think about what they paid for it. Think about what it's worth now. And think about who captured that difference, that gap between what was paid and what it's now worth, and whether any of that value was created by the person who captured it. In most cases, the answer is no. The value was created by the city growing around the land, by infrastructure being built nearby, by schools and hospitals and transit lines that were funded by public taxes, by the collective decision of millions of people to show up every day and make a place worth living in. And the person who captured it, who pocketed the difference, was simply the person whose name was on the deed. There is a term for an economic system where a small group of people extract wealth from everyone else, simply by virtue of owning the ground beneath their feet. We don't usually use that term when we talk about Manhattan real estate, but the structure is the same. The Durst family arrived with $3 in a trade. Within 2 generations, they had a deed. Within 4 generations, they had the deed to the most symbolic building in the Western world. And the clock on the wall, the one Seymour put there to shame the government, it's still running. $37 trillion. The number keeps climbing, and somewhere in that climb is every rent check you've ever written, every lease you've ever signed, every time you looked at what you were paying for the ground beneath your feet and wondered whether any of it made sense. It makes sense, just not to you. It makes sense to the people who own the ground. It has always made sense to them, since 1704, since 1902, since the first family figured out that the only thing you ever really need to do, the only move that compounds forever, that survives every crisis, that outlasts every market cycle, is to get the deed and never let it go. If you've made it this far into this video with me, I want to pause for just a moment, not to recap, not to summarize, just to say something directly. If this kind of story is the reason you show up, if you're the kind of person who wants to understand how the world actually works, not just how it's presented, then this channel was built for you. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications. We put out this kind of content consistently, and the next one is already in the works. And if this video made you think of someone, a friend, a co-worker, someone who pays rent and wonders why it never gets easier, send it to them. Not because we need the views, because some ideas are worth sharing before the conversation disappears. Now, back to the game, because here's what I haven't told you yet. The game has a crack in it. Not a collapse, not a revolution. A crack. The kind that starts small and quiet and takes years before anyone admits it's structural. After 2020, something happened to the Manhattan office market that the Durst family, and every family in this story, had never fully prepared for. People stopped coming in. Not all of them, not forever, but enough. The pandemic didn't just close offices. It gave 40 million white-collar workers in America a sustained experience of something they had never been allowed to test before. The possibility that the commute, the tower, the assigned desk on the 38th floor, none of it was actually necessary, and a meaningful percentage of them decided they preferred the alternative. By 2023, physical occupancy rates in Manhattan office buildings were running between 50 and 65% of pre-pandemic levels. Class A towers, the kind the Durst organization owns, held up better than average. Tenants with environmental mandates and ESG commitments still wanted LEED certified space. The premium for green buildings remained real. But the underlying pressure was new, and it was structural. Douglas Durst, in interviews around that period, was careful, measured. He talked about flight to quality, about how the best buildings would capture displaced tenants from weaker buildings, about how New York always comes back. He was probably right. He's also 80 years old. And for the first time in the history of this family, for the first time across 4 generations and 110 years of operation, the people running the Durst organization are doing so without any of the founding generation alive to consult. Joseph is gone. Seymour is gone. The men who built this thing from $3 and a tailor's trade and a philosophy of never selling, they are gone. What remains is the 4th generation. Alexander, Helena, Christopher, Lucas. Educated, capable, positioned inside one of the most durable private institutions in American real estate history. But inheriting a philosophy is not the same as having lived it. Seymour didn't just tell Douglas not to sell. He showed him what not selling looked like during a crisis. He showed him New York in the 1970s, bankrupt, broken, dangerous, and what the other side of that looked like for the people who stayed. That kind of knowledge doesn't transfer through a memo, or a board meeting, or a transition plan. It transfers through time spent in the same room, watching the same person make the same decision under pressure, over and over, until it becomes instinct. The 4th generation of the Durst family has not yet had their crisis. They've had challenges. The pandemic was real. The office market disruption is real. The local law 97 carbon emission regulations, which now threaten to penalize some of the very green systems the family pioneered in the 1990s, are real. Douglas Durst has publicly criticized that law as inflexible. The man who helped write the standards for sustainable construction in America is now pushing back against the regulatory consequences of those standards. The pioneer complaining about the frontier he opened. There's something almost poetic about that. But here is what none of these challenges have done yet. None of them have forced the Durst family to sell. The philosophy holds, the deed stays, and the clock on the wall outside their building on 6th Avenue keeps counting. Past 37 trillion, past whatever number it reaches by the time you watch this. Indifferent to everything. To the family that installed it. To the government it was meant to shame. To the tenants paying rent in the towers around it. To the people walking past it on the sidewalk, who glance up, feel vaguely uncomfortable, and keep moving. The clock doesn't care. It just counts. There's something the clock doesn't measure. It measures debt. It measures the gap between what a government collects and what it spends. It measures the number that grows every second, whether anyone is watching or not. It is, in that sense, perfectly honest. The clock doesn't lie. It doesn't spin.
It doesn't hold press conferences or issue statements or blame the other party. It just shows you the number. But there's another number it doesn't show. It doesn't show you the cumulative value of every tax abatement ever granted to a private real estate family in the city of New York. It doesn't show you the compounded appreciation of land that was purchased at Depression-era prices and held through a century of publicly funded urban development. It doesn't show you the distance, measured in dollars, between what the ground was worth when Joseph Durst bought it and what it's worth now, and how much of that distance was created by public investment rather than private ingenuity. It doesn't show you what the system gave to the people who were already inside it, only what the system owes to everyone else. I've been thinking about what it means to build something that lasts. Not a building, not a company. Something that actually lasts, that outlives the person who made it, that survives the mistakes of the next generation, that keeps compounding long after the original insight has been forgotten. Joseph Durst didn't build a company. He built a posture, a way of standing in relation to land and time and uncertainty. Buy the ground. Hold it. Don't let sentiment or panic or the seduction of a good offer pull you away from the single most important asset you will ever own. Let the city grow around you. Let other people's energy and creativity and collective effort do the work of appreciation. And collect. That posture, passed from Joseph to Seymour to Douglas to the fourth generation now sitting in those offices, is not a business strategy in the conventional sense. You can't learn it in a business school. You can't replicate it by reading about it. It requires something that most people in the modern economy have been systematically trained not to value. Patience that doesn't need to be rewarded in your own lifetime. Seymour Durst planted the national debt clock on his building in 1989. He died in 1995. He never saw the number cross 10 trillion. He never saw the display run out of digits. He never saw his son Douglas stand next to a new version of that clock outside a building that didn't exist when he was alive. A LEED platinum tower, financed in part by the very public mechanisms the clock was designed to criticize. He planted something and didn't live to see what it grew into. That happens more than we admit with the things that matter. The fourth generation of the Durst family is inheriting something they did not build. That's not a criticism. That's simply the condition of inheritance. Nobody builds what they inherit. The question, the only question that ever matters at the moment of inheritance, is whether you understand what you're holding. Not the buildings, not the square footage, not the lease agreements or the refinancing structures or the equity stakes in symbolic towers. The posture. Whether you understand that the thing that made this family what it is has almost nothing to do with brilliance or vision or any of the qualities that get celebrated in profiles and documentaries and keynote speeches. It has to do with a tailor from a village that doesn't exist anymore, deciding in 1915 that the building on the corner of 1 West 34th Street was worth buying, and then not selling it, and then not selling it again, and again, and again. Through depression and war and urban decay and fiscal crisis and a global pandemic, and everything the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st could throw at a piece of land on a 59 square kilometer island. The building is still there. The family still owns it. The clock is still running. And here is the thing I want to leave you with before we reach the end of this story. The national debt clock was designed to make you feel something about the government. Anxious, maybe. Angry. Aware of a problem so large it can barely be contained on a digital display. But the families who installed it, and the families who sit on the board of the institution that shapes how that debt gets translated into policy, into zoning, into tax structure, into the price of the ground beneath every building in this city. They don't feel anxious when they look at that number. They feel something closer to patience, because they've seen numbers like that before. Numbers that looked catastrophic from the outside. Numbers that, if you held long enough, eventually became someone else's problem. And the ground, their ground, was still there when the number finally changed. It has always been there. It will be there after the clock breaks, after the display runs out of digits again, after the next crisis and the next recovery and the next generation of people walking past on the sidewalk, glancing up, feeling that vague discomfort. The ground doesn't care about the number. The ground just waits.
In 1902, a man arrived in New York with $3. He didn't know what Manhattan would become. He didn't know what his family would become. He didn't have a plan that stretched across 4 generations and 120 years. He had a trade, a survival instinct, and $3. And somewhere in the quiet stubbornness of a man who had already decided he was not going back, something took root. Not ambition, something quieter than ambition. A relationship with time. I've thought about Joseph Durst a lot while putting this together. Not the empire, not the buildings, not the clock or the subsidies, or the zoning victories, or the equity stake in the most symbolic tower in the Western world. I've thought about the man standing at the port of New York in 1902, looking at an island he didn't yet understand, carrying everything he owned in whatever he was carrying. $3. And I keep coming back to this question. What did he know that we've forgotten? Because somewhere between his generation and ours, something shifted. We stopped thinking in decades and started thinking in quarters. We stopped asking what a piece of ground would be worth in 50 years and started asking what it would return by the end of the fiscal year. We built financial systems of extraordinary sophistication, instruments that can slice and dice and leverage and securitize any asset into a tradable abstraction. And somewhere in that sophistication, we lost the thing that Joseph Durst had, the willingness to wait. Not the patience of someone who has nothing else to do. The patience of someone who understands that the most valuable things don't move on the timeline you want them to move on. They move on their own timeline. And your job, if you're lucky enough to understand this early enough, is simply to not get in the way. The Durst family didn't get in the way. The Rudin family didn't get in the way. The families who are still here, still holding, still compounding, they all learned some version of the same lesson. that the ground doesn't need you to be clever. It needs you to be present and patient and quiet enough to let time do what time does. Now, I want to say something about the system, because this entire story, every family, every building, every zoning decision and tax abatement and board meeting at the REBNY, it all sits inside a system. And the system has a logic. And the logic is not evil. It's not a conspiracy. It's just incomplete. It rewards the people who got there first. It rewards the people who had access to the rooms where decisions were made. It rewards patience, but only the patience that comes with capital behind it. The patience of someone who can afford to wait because they already have enough. Not the patience of someone who is waiting because they have no other choice. And that asymmetry, that gap between the patience of the Durst family and the patience of the person paying rent in one of their buildings, is the thing the clock doesn't measure. The clock measures what the government owes. It doesn't measure what the system owes. Those are different debts, and only one of them has a display on 6th Avenue.
I don't know what Joseph Durst thought about on his first night in New York. I don't know if he felt afraid or hopeful, or simply exhausted from the crossing. I don't know if he looked at the city and saw possibility, or just another place where survival would require everything he had. But I know what he did the next morning. He went to work. And then the morning after that, and the one after that, until the work became something, until the something became a building, until the building became an empire, until the empire became the clock on the wall and the name on the deed to the tallest, most symbol-laden building in the Western Hemisphere. $3. 123 years. The same island, the same ground. If this story stayed with you, if somewhere in the last hour something clicked into place about how power accumulates, how systems sustain themselves, how the distance between $3 and $8 billion is mostly just time and a refusal to let go, then do something with that. Share this video with 5 people who should hear it. Not 5 people who will agree with everything in it. 5 people who are curious enough to sit with the discomfort of it. 5 people who pay rent and wonder why. 5 people who look at that clock on 6th Avenue and feel that vague unease and deserve to know where it comes from. Subscribe to this channel. Not because we asked you to, because if you've spent an hour here, you already know this is the kind of place worth coming back to. And leave a comment, not to tell us what you thought of the video. Tell us what you want to understand next. What system? What family? What empire operating in plain sight that nobody has stopped to explain? We read every single one. The next story is already being built, the same way Joseph Durst built his, one piece at a time, without selling.